All right, let me redo this. Okay. Hello there, everybody. I'm Al Blumkin. This is the Comfortably Zone Radio Network. And we're doing a talk on the history of the Pittsburgh Pirates today. My guest is my usual co-host for this segment, David Nemec. And today we have Ian Kahanowitz, who runs his own podcast called Genesis on this network. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
Great to be here, too. Thank you.
And, David is the reigning authority probably in the country on the 19th century. And we're going to ask him to start off with the Pittsburgh franchise because they started in the Old American Association in 1882. So, David, right now the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Al. Actually, the Pittsburgh area had a professional team prior to 1882. They played in the International Association, which is considered now to have been a minor league, and that was in the late 1870s. Pittsburgh then was without professional baseball. They had semi-pro baseball until the American Association formed, as Al mentioned, in 1882. And it had its beginnings in Pittsburgh. It's a very, very murky story, and rather than spend 3.5 hours and still not even begin it, I'll just say that because Pittsburgh actually was one of the original franchises, and the first genuine meeting was held in Pittsburgh. The first president of the American Association, which was a rebel major league, beginning in 1882, was Denny Harmer. Denny McKnight. I'm sorry, Harmer was his first name. McKnight placed the franchise not in Pittsburgh itself, but in Allegheny, which at that time was a separate city outside Pittsburgh limits across the Allegheny River. And the franchise was called not Pittsburgh, but Allegheny. Pittsburgh is interesting in a number of ways in the 19th century. Until near the end of the century, it was spelled without an H. And in major league standings throughout, it was always Pittsburgh, except when it was in the American Association. And then it was called simply Allegheny. And the original team in 1882 was an admixture of some good players, very bizarre players, and a lot of players who had the problem that so many major leaguers did in the beginning years, serious alcohol problem. The team was considered by historian Lee Allen to be probably the biggest bunch of drunks ever to field a major league team. And their position in the standings the first season showed it. They were in the middle of the pack, never really posed a threat to the eventual pennant winner, Cincinnati. In Pittsburgh, instead of gaining momentum, actually began to lose very quickly. And by the second season, they were in the second division. By the third season in 1884, when the association expanded to 12 teams, they were among the bottom feeders. At that time, they had acquired Bob Ferguson to be their manager and general manager. And Ferguson, although a great player and later a great umpire, was a terrible manager, terrible at handling his men, and the team sank almost out of sight. And McKnight ended up managing the team for part of the season. Before the 1885 season began, Pittsburgh received a tremendous boost when the Columbus franchise, which had been second in the American Association in 1884, was forced to fold its tent. And they put all their players on the open market and ended up selling their franchise more or less to Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, in gaining its choice of the Columbus players, picked up Ed Morris, probably the best left-handed pitcher in the 19th century, and also a fine catcher named Fred Carroll, and a number of other significant contributors to the team. And in 1885, the Pittsburgh team finished high in the standings. In 1886, it actually finished second to the St. Louis Browns, which were then in their second season of a 4-year pennant streak. But in 1886, Pittsburgh had picked up a player named Sam Barkley from St. Louis, and by illegitimate means, as it turned out, Barkley really belonged to the Baltimore team in the American Association. And the behavior was tracked to, well, Denny McKnight took the hit, really, for the illegal signing of Barkley. And Pittsburgh then, in a huff, stormed out of the American Association when they were offered a slot in the National League to replace one of the National League folding franchises, Kansas City. And they were the first American Association team to abscond to the National League. They then became a member of the National League in 1887 and have remained so today. However, their nickname still remained the Allegheny because that's where they were situated. Allegheny remained a separate city from Pittsburgh until the early 20th century, when it was incorporated as part of the Pittsburgh municipality.
Weren't they terrible in 1890? One of the worst teams.
Well, yeah. They fielded a competent team in 87, 88, and 89. And in 1890, when the Players League formed, a team was put in Pittsburgh in the Players League, and that team garnered almost all the major contributors to the 1889 team. In fact, it garnered every single really good player. And the 1890 Pittsburgh team became the worst National League entry to that point. It was eventually eclipsed by the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, but in 1890 the team was just absolutely horrible. And
Dave, let me ask.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. First of all, I want the listeners to know you wrote a book called The Beer and Whiskey League, and we'll get to that because I'm going to ask you about second baseman Lou Bierbauer. But what I want the listeners to know is back then, before 1890, weren't teams like just called the Bostons or the New Yorks or the Chicagos?
Oftentimes, nicknames were certainly informal, and they could change from one newspaper edition to the next. Pittsburgh at various times was called the Smoked Italians. In 1898, they were popularly called the Patriots for one season only. But as you mentioned, the Bierbauer case, when Lou Bierbauer had been a member of the Philadelphia American Association team prior to jumping to the Players League, and when the Players League folded, players were expected to go back to their original teams if their original teams had reserved them. Philadelphia had neglected to reserve both Bierbauer and Harry Stovey, two of their major stars. And Bierbauer then jumped to the Pittsburgh team. And the Pittsburgh team was, a battle was fought. Philadelphia and the American Association lost the battle. Bierbauer was allowed to join Pittsburgh, and the team then received its nickname, the Pirates. And, of course, that nickname has stuck with them ever since. They've been called the Corsairs. They've been called a number of other nicknames, but only informally. The Pirates, although it still was not a formal nickname until the 20th century, became their nickname throughout most of the 90s and then into the early part of the 20th century. Pittsburgh was famous for one very important reason during the 1890s. They did not field a competitive team most years. But in 1893, they finished second to the Baltimore Orioles, who were in the midst of winning. They finished second to Boston, and Boston was the top team at the time. And Pittsburgh felt, well, we should get a chance to, we had a good team. There should be a postseason series, as there was during the 1880s between the American Association and National League. And one of the Pittsburgh owners, William Temple, started the Temple Cup, which first came into play in 1894. But by that time, Pittsburgh had dropped down in the standings quite significantly, and the first Temple Cup was between the second-place Giants and the first-place Baltimore Orioles, who were then streaking to their first of 3 consecutive pennants. And Pittsburgh never really did field a competitive team again throughout the 1890s until after the 1899 season, the 1900, the last year of the 19th century. The National League cut back from 12 teams to 8. It had gone to 8 teams in 1892 after the American Association folded, and 4 American Association teams were embraced by the National League to swell the league to a very unwieldy 12-club circuit. And after the 1899 season, Louisville dropped out of the National League. It has never had a major league team since, but it had a lot of good players. And there was syndicate ownership at that time in 1888 and 1899. And Barney Dreyfuss had an interest in both the Louisville and the Pittsburgh teams and brought almost all of Louisville's star players over to Pittsburgh in time for the 1900 season, led by player-manager Fred Clark, Jack Cheeseborough, a great pitcher, Jesse Tannehill, another fine left-hander, and most of all, the great Honus Wagner, who had been with Louisville and split his time mostly between third base and the outfield and some first base. Wagner came to Pittsburgh mainly as an outfielder in 1900, and I'll let you gentlemen take over from there to describe Wagner's career, which was very important.
Let me, before I give this over to Ian, who runs the very, very informative Deadball site on Facebook, that as far as I'm concerned, Honus Wagner was the player of the National League in the Deadball era, and nobody else was a position player was close to him. The only one that might have been close to him if he cared at all was Mike Donlin. So Ian, we'll give the floor to you for the Deadball.
All right, that sounds great. Before I even get to the Deadball, I got to ask David something. Dave, let me ask you something. We spoke about Barney Dreyfuss, and the Colonels were going to be folding. Did he not purchase a half interest in the Pirates during that time secretly?
Yeah, he did. There was a lot of clandestine activity going on. Exactly what happened, when it happened, how much money was involved. Some of it has come through. A lot of it hasn't. But I think Dreyfuss had a pretty good tip that the National League was going to reduce to 8 teams, and Louisville would not be one of them. And with the good players he had in the Louisville franchise, I think he started looking for a home even before the reduction occurred.
And before the Colonels officially folded and the money was passed around, the league didn't know, the National League didn't know how to structure this, because if he bought a partial interest and sent his men up the Ohio River, it wasn't even to Pittsburgh, I think. I think they played in Allegheny. It's funny, they were called the Pirates, but I don't think they actually played in Pittsburgh till around 1907.
No, they didn't. They didn't. You're right. They remained in Allegheny, but I think Allegheny became part of Pittsburgh in 1907, coincidentally.
Yeah. But they didn't know how to structure this. And if memory serves me correct, and there's a lot of stuff in my noggin up here that's either going to waste or not, they structured it as a trade rather than just,
Yeah. They did. They sent a couple of nondescript players from Pittsburgh to Louisville, and the bulk of the Louisville franchise went to Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
and nobody bought for a minute that this was a trade.
Yeah.
But you're right. It was designated as such. And I think in most reference works you'll even see it listed as a trade, although knowledgeable, historians know that it was anything but.
Yeah, man, that's all I wanted to get out before I got into the dead ball. But as for Honus Wagner, he's probably one of the best shortstops who ever played the game. He played from 1897 to 1917. As Alan told you in my site Tycob in the dead ball era, I give a lot of information about Honus Wagner. Wagner won 8 batting titles. Again, he's tied with Tony Gwynn in the National League. For that, he led the league in slugging 6 times and in stolen bases 5 times. He was called the Flying Dutchman due to his superb speed and, of course, his German heritage, which again, Pennsylvania Dutch is actually German, so it's not Dutch, as many people would think. He was a member, of course, of the first inaugurating class into the Hall of Fame. But I think one of the things that endears people to Wagner is that baseball card, which is sold for what? $2 million?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just. I mean, people just know that, and there's so much more to Honus Wagner than just that. I mean, the man was, just a genius in an era where there were no home runs. He actually, like Cobb, he was able to strategize. He was bow-legged, he was barrel-chested, he was long-lived. He was often, linked to an octopus sometimes. When he fielded grounders, he had huge hands and was able to, get in the dirt. He was able to throw it. He had a good throw. Some said that it was like a tail of a comet. I think more than anything, Honus Wagner was, he was an example in Pittsburgh for many years. It's funny if you're going to relate an individual player to a franchise, you can say player manager Fred Clark, was the helm at the Pittsburgh Pirates. But when Honus Wagner began declining, around 1916, 1917, the Pirates declined as well. And it just showed you how important Honus Wagner was.
Yeah, there was a story which I've heard, I don't know whether it's true or not, but the reason that the American League didn't go after Pittsburgh players for the first year or two is because they were getting players from every place else, and they wanted to make the National League extremely one-sided. That's why the Pirates won in 1902 by 27, I think it was 27 and a half games. And supposedly once the peace agreement was signed, that's when Jack Chesbrough and Jesse Tannehill jumped to the American League. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but I've read that in a number of places.
Well, there's also been discussion that Pittsburgh was slotted for the American League. The American League wanted to put a team in Pittsburgh, and that was part of what pushed for the National League to settle. Because Pittsburgh at that time, as we pointed out, was the team in command of the National League, and to have had a rival, or even maybe even the rival would have even swiped some of Pittsburgh's stars, particularly Wagner. It would have been a disaster for the National League. It would have flipped to
they were contender most, either winning or a contender most of that decade. In 1908, they finished tied with the Giants, 1 game behind the Cubs. And in 1909, they won 110 games and won the pennant over six games over the Cubs, and they beat the Tigers in the World Series 4-3 with Babe Adams winning 3 games. And Wagner thoroughly outplayed Cobb in that series.
And it should be noted. And at the time, Wagner was 35 years old and Cobb was just 22. And what also should be noted is that Wagner out-hit Cobb in that series from 333 batting average to 231, stole 6 bases, establishing a new series record at the time. So, you're talking about two different age groups where Ty was pretty much, in his fourth or fifth year, and Wagner had been a player for about 12 years by then.
That was the last year that Ty Cobb got into the World Series.
That's right.
Yeah.
And,
Al and I discussed this the other day that probably the two greatest middle infielders in that era. Wagner was certainly one, and the other was Nap Lajoie, who had jumped to the American League from the Philadelphia club after the 1900 season. And the irony is that both of these gentlemen, who are considered by many authorities to be the best ever at their position, particularly as fielders, began their careers at other positions. It wasn't until Wagner's seventh season, really, that he became a full-time shortstop. He'd played first, third, the outfield, almost everywhere. In 1898, Pittsburgh had tried I think it was at least around a dozen different guys at shortstop. Got in at least one game. I think even Fred Clark, the player-manager, got into a game or two at short. But the one guy they never tried at short, the Louisville team, he was still in Louisville then, was Hannes Wagner. It wasn't really till 1901 that Wagner started getting his first real taste of short, and he still wasn't made a regular there until 1903. And Lajoie began as a first baseman. Al and I talked about how he was the dominant first baseman in the 1890s in terms of having the greatest season by a first baseman. So it's remarkable that it took that long for somebody really to get hold of where these two guys belong, what position they really needed to occupy for the bulk of their careers.
As Ian pointed out, the Pirates, when Wagner started to slow down in the mid-teens, the Pirates started to slow down, and they were never really in contention until 1921, where they had a substantial lead over the New York Giants, and then came into the Polo Grounds and lost a 5-game series. They were swept by the Giants in that series, and that knocked them out of any pennant hopes. Then a couple of New York years in 1924, they had a pitcher during that era named Wilbur Cooper, who I believe won 202 games for them, which is still. This guy hasn't pitched in Pirate uniform in 93 years, and he still has the all-time record for Pirate wins. They shipped him to the Cubs in a big trade, which brought in, I think, Charlie Grimm. No, Grimm went the other way. Pirates traded Cooper off to the Cubs. In 1925, when they came on and they wound up winning the pennant and winning the World Series, again beating Walter Johnson in the seventh game against the old Washington Senators. They had Kai Kyler, Hall of Famer, who came in. They had a whole series over their history of Hall of Fame hitters without very much in pitching. And go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, it was interesting though when you go through that era. Wagner had the influence on the 20s, 30s, 40s, up to his retirement at 52. It has to be noted that he not only coached, but he was a hitting instructor from 1933 to 52, including being a coach during the 20s. So he saw players like Aki Vaughn and Ralph Kiner, Pie Traynor, and Hank Greenberg when Greenberg was traded to the Pirates in the late 40s. So Wagner's, timeline goes through those great 20s clubs, like the 1925 Bucks when they beat Walter Johnson in Game 7, and then they had that decline. But he opened up pretty much the new era in the 1950s, which we'll talk about later on, of course, and that's the timeline he had.
Yeah, in 1931, they had 5 Hall of Famers in their starting lineup. Well, in 1927 they won, but that season is mostly remembered for the Kai Kyler situation, where Kyler refused to bat second in the lineup, and the manager at the time, Tony Bush, refused to play him.
That was 27.
And Kyler only played 85 games that season. And they wound up winning the pennant. Lloyd Wayner was, I believe, a rookie that year. They had Paul Wayner, and they had Pie Traynor, and they went in against the Murderers Row Yankees and were swept in 4 straight. And after that, the next time they were, in 1931, as you mentioned a couple seconds ago, they had 5 Hall of Famers in their lineup. They had the Wayner brothers, they had Pie Traynor, they had Archie Vaughan, and they had Freddie Lindstrom, who they had gotten from the New York Giants. And they think they came in 3rd or 4th because the pitching was, shall we say, not up to speed. And then the only time that I think they were contenders, up to and through World War II were in 1938 when they blew a fairly comfortable lead to the Chicago Cubs, and they were playing the Cubs late in the season, and there was a game that was supposed to end in a tie to enable them to catch a train. The game would have to be replayed, and the pitcher named Mace Brown threw a home run pitch to Gabby Hartnett, which became famous as the homer and the Glowman. But they finished, close second that year. But then they started to really fall apart. And the only saving grace when the war ended is Ralph Kiner came up in 1946. Now, he had 23 home runs in 1946 and wound up leading the National League.
Yeah,
next year,
home run total way down in the first 2 post-war years.
In 1947 they had gotten Hank Greenberg, who the Detroit Tigers somehow released after that season, after he led the American League in home runs and runs batted in, and they brought Greenberg into Pittsburgh for 1 year, and they put in the fence called Greenberg Gardens, then Kiner's Corner, where they knocked off 30 feet from left field and Forbes Field to left center, and Kiner hit 51 home runs, that tied him for the lead with Johnny Mize. The Giants in the National League, they tied the next year with 40 home runs, and basically the team had gotten to a point after a mild contention in 1948 when they came in 4th, where the team sank to the bottom, and for a number of years the only reason to go to their games was to see Kiner hit.
Well, let me just say this. The good thing about
I was cut off for a couple minutes. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened, but I'm back with you guys now.
Okay, welcome back.
Welcome back. But in 46, the Dreyfus family ownership came to an end.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
And they sold it, and what was interesting about it, it was led by a businessman from Indianapolis called Frank McKinney, and the group that was buying them also had Singer and a Bing Crosby in it.
No, he's the reason they got Vernon Law.
Yeah.
Because when they were recruiting Vernon Law, it was, as most people know, it was a Mormon and very religious, and no smoking or drinking. The pirate ownership had Bing Crosby called the Law household, and that's how they wound up signing him.
That's exactly right.
There's a question I was about to ask just before I was cut off. And almost all the great players from the Wagner and Lajoie, Cobb, Speaker era eventually either became player managers or managers upon retirement. The lone exception that I can think of until Babe Ruth came along, among really great players, excepting pitchers. A lot of pitchers didn't make it as managers, but that was another reason for that. Was Wagner. Wagner was an interim manager for about 3 or 4 games in 1917, but to my knowledge, he was never offered the manager's job.
No, I think basically, as it's been proven fairly consistently that the superstars generally don't make good managers, and when you're referring to Cobb or Speaker or Lajoie, those types, they basically were player managers.
Yeah, but Wagner, why couldn't Wagner was from the same era? Why wouldn't Wagner have been given
Fred
the same?
Clark, I still think was, when Wagner retired, I think Fred Clark was still, had the managerial job there locked up, and maybe he didn't want it.
Well, I think with Wagner, they focused on his hitting because that's where his strengths were. Fred Clark, I do believe, was heavily embedded as the manager for it's one of the longest tenures, as I recall. But Wagner was for his proficiency at the bat, the way he strategized. I don't think Wagner was a good manager of players in general. I think he was more of a loner himself. And I don't think he can control the egos in the clubhouse as well.
He was fairly easygoing.
Yeah.
As a person, to impose discipline on, people who, a couple of hours before were their teammates, were his teammates, I think probably would have been very, very difficult for him to do.
That's right.
Well, didn't the Pirates, when Clark stepped down as manager, I think there was a year in 1916 when somebody else ran the club. I don't remember who it was. But then Hugo Bedzik took over in 1917. Now, there was a real disciplinarian, if you want.
No, he's a football coach.
A football coach. And he really from what I understand, ran a very tight ship. Wasn't a particularly good baseball strategizer, but I think he handled the men fairly well. But his tenure didn't really go anywhere, and then they bounced him, and I think was it Gibson that got the job temporarily.
And by 1925, it was Bill McKechnie.
And
then because they brought Clark, and there was almost a revolt over them bringing Clark back in 1926. And they brought in Donnie Bush, who had the huge argument with Kai Kyler, which eventually wound up benching Kyler for most of the last 2 months of the season and forcing a trade to the Cubs over the winter.
They had Pie Trainer after Jewel Lenz, and of course Frankie Frisch, who managed the Gas House gang of St. Louis 6 years earlier.
No, he was later on. He was in the 40s.
Yeah, he was from 40 to 46. Yeah.
And then they brought in Billy Meyer in 1948, who had been managing the Yankee system. And for some reason, Billy Meyer's number one is retired by the Pirates. And I've spoken to people in Pittsburgh. I've gone back and forth on a group on Facebook called Corsair Tales Through the Years, which is essentially Pittsburgh Pirate history. And nobody can tell me why Billy Meyer's number is retired. I've been asking this for a lot of years, and I can't get any definitive answer from anyone. Well, anyway, he was there, and Billy Meyer had a lot of experience playing with horrible teams because he played the full season with the 1916 Philadelphia A's, who managed, I think, to win 36 and 117. So when the Pirates crashed in 1952, Brad Rickey had been brought in by John Galbraith as general manager, and Rickey had 2 missions. One was to cut payroll, and the other was basically he decided he had to get rid of everybody who was on the roster at the time. And by 1952, the only ones that were really left were Ralph Kiner and Gus Bell, and after 1952, he shipped Gus Bell to Cincinnati in one of the worst trades they ever made.
I'm sure this isn't the reason Meyer's number was retired, but he was the last guy to finish above 500 until the Rickey era pretty much ended, and when Murtaugh came on board. And
but that's still not a reason.
That 48 team was in retrospect a standout. Kiner's best Pirates team, I think. I think 47.
Yeah,
didn't finish that well.
That's the only winning Pirate team we ever played on.
Yeah, and it wasn't that good a team, but it finished above 500. And
52, they hit rock bottom. They won 42 games and lost 112. They had Joe Garaggiello, who made a lifetime of talking about this team. They were They were he was the regular catcher there for the entire season, and they had a pitcher named Murray Dixon who had won 20 games the year before, who somehow managed to go 14-21 with them, with the 52 Pirates, and that was an incredible performance. They had Bob Friend and Dick Grote were the only two that lasted until 1960. Vernon Law was lucky; he missed 52 and 53 because he was in the military service.
When did they pick up Skinner?
Skinner started in 54, 55.
54, 5.
And Face came in 53. Elroy Face.
Yeah.
But you know, Alan, you mentioned Myers not being in the Hall of Fame, and
no, I mentioned Myers having his number retired.
Billy Myers. Well, Billy Myers' number 1 was retired by the Pirates in 54.
Yeah, nobody knows why. Nobody can tell me why.
You know, but neither could. But you know what? He was. If you look at history, he probably was one of the most dominant minor league baseball managers ever to manage in the minors. He just didn't have that kind of success. With Pittsburgh, he had a 317 and 452 record over 5 seasons. And as a player, he only had a career batting average of 236.
Yeah, as I said, he was on the 1916 A's, which are arguably the worst team of the 20th century. Even worse than the 62 Mets. Or the,
now let me ask.
But that's interesting. You've never gotten an answer to that question.
Yeah.
Something went on in 54.
Yeah, in those years they had what the Pirate fans called the Ricky Dinks. They had, one team coming, one team playing, and one team going.
Yeah.
They would bring up pitchers from Class D, like Ren Netchai, who struck out 27.
Career. Bill Bell.
Bill Bell pitched 3 no-hitters in Class D. Ron Netchai, who struck out 27 men in a game in Class D, and they bring these guys up who were totally unready.
Ricky rushed them right up and
totally,
wrecked them.
And they flopped, and that was basically it.
Let me ask you this, guys. Oh, go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry about that.
But and then after Meyer left, they when Fred Haney, who finished last the next 3 years, and then in 1956 they started to show a little bit of life when they became prominent when Dale Long, the first baseman, hit home runs in 8 consecutive games.
Yeah, and
they started building the team. Clemente came in 54. Clemente came in 1955. Bill Verdon came over from the Cardinals in 1956.
But we can't let this era go without mentioning the Pirates' famous bonus baby at that time.
Oh, they had a bunch of them.
Well, Paul Pettit was the.
Yeah, they got one win out of him for $100,000. They had the Johnny and Eddie O'Brien, who were basketball players in Seattle and should have stayed playing basketball. They had Vic Janowitz, who was a Heisman Trophy winner, who got seriously injured after.
He was a car accident and wrecked his professional career.
And they had another top-notch football player named Warren Pepper, who was a pitcher they had to keep on the roster for 2 years. It was also horrible, but they had a slew of them. Another one that came in 1956 was Bill Mazeroski, who came up as a 19-year-old playing for the Hollywood Stars in the Pacific Coast League, and immediately took over as the regular second baseman there, which he would hold for 15 seasons.
And it was Branch Rickey, got to be mentioned, that he came over from the Dodgers. A lot of the youngsters that he picked up, because as we know, Branch Rickey was a master of having the farm teams and stuff. A lot of them failed. But Rickey's nucleus, Vern Law, Bob Friend, Elroy Face, Dick Grote, Bill Mazeroski, Roberto Clemente, I think Willie Stodge, who joined the team in 1959.
No, he didn't make it there till 62.
62. All right. So,
Yeah.
but
I don't know if those are really Ricky's finds, because the Pirates had some pretty good scouts. They really stole Clemente from under the Dodgers. I don't think Ricky was on top of that one. I think that was, that can be attributable to some of their scouts.
They did draft Elroy Face also out of the Dodger system.
Oh, I didn't know.
Now
that.
let me ask you guys this: how did Danny Murtaugh shake this team in the late 50s when he became the manager?
Murtaugh had played for them. He had played for them in the 50s, and he went after he finished playing. He went and managed. They had affiliation with the New Orleans Pelicans and the Southern Association. And he went directly into managing that team. So when they canned Bobby Bragan in mid-1957, they brought in Danny Murtaugh from the Southern Association, and with Frank Thomas having a good year, and some of the players that they had maturing in 1958, they finished second place to the Milwaukee Braves, and were in it until about the last 10 days of the season. Because I started following them extremely closely then. And they backslid in 1959 because basically Friend was 8-19. They had some other players that had bad years because they were lionized after the 1958 season. In 1960, they put it all together. And in 1985, I had the privilege of interviewing Dick Grote for about 4 hours when he's doing the University of Pittsburgh basketball broadcasts, and that's where I went to school. That's how I followed them. I lived in Forbes Field when I was there. And I asked Grote, and Grote said that Murtaugh he was way ahead of a lot of other managers in managing the game. I knew I had
that was going to lead
like
into my next question. Do you think he's at least a marginal Hall of Fame manager?
Yes. Well, yeah, there's always the question of, name two, the trivia question, name two managers that won 2 World Series in 2 tries and not in the Hall of Fame. You throw in Cito Gaston, you throw in Bill Carrigan from the 15-16 Red Sox, and there are a couple of others.
Yeah.
But Francona was in that club until he lost last year with the Indians.
Yeah.
But there's a case that could be made for him. But he knew how to handle them, and but in 1960 they won something like 25 games in the last of the 9th inning, and then they pulled off that miracle World Series win over the Yankees. And
yeah, that was a miracle. They were badly outscored in all 3 losses.
Yeah, in fact, that was like the first SABR presentation I ever did nationally was on that series, because it was a couple of months after I talked to Dick Grote, and from what I've read, that the Yankee players who were there for that series and there in 1955 when the Dodgers beat them in Brooklyn always took the 1960 loss a lot harder than they did in the 1955 loss.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Yeah. If you watched all 7 games, it was like 2 different teams showed up.
Well, I was lucky enough. Me and a friend of mine snuck in. We were watching the game on TV, and when they tied it up in the 8th inning, they went ahead in the 8th inning with Hal Smith's home run. We were lucky. We ran over the Forbes Field. We were able to sneak in the left field bleachers.
Well, you got in.
Crouched down. Yeah, I was 17. Who knew any better at the time? Well, we were 17 years old, and we saw them tie it up in the top of the 9th with the mantle slide back into first base, and Mazeroski hit the home run. I always said that if we had stayed there, that game had gone on long, we probably would have gotten into big trouble.
Well, why?
Because we were in the ballpark illegally.
Yeah, but who knew it?
Nobody. No, the game ended, so
nobody.
Yeah, but if that game had gone on,
usually in the World Series it was different. But in a lot of parks, if you came in after the middle of the 7th inning,
I know the Forbes Field was like that.
Let young kids especially, they would let in free.
Yeah, and I bought I bought a program for 50 cents after as we were leaving. I still have it.
Yeah, that's a treasure.
Yeah, that was it. And as I said, during my time at Pitt, I attended almost every home game that was played for those 4 years there. The bleachers the left field bleachers cost $1, and if we got ambitious and went to the grandstand, it cost $3.
The last game I ever saw in Forbes was in the 50s. This was after Kiner had left.
Yeah.
But was Greenberg Gardens still as it
They
was?
pulled that out after 1953 because of they had made a rule because of Bill Veeck playing with the fences in Municipal Stadium in Cleveland that they couldn't move, change the dimensions of the ballpark during the season.
Well, Veeck would change them from series to series.
Because they put the rule in.
Yeah,
so they had the fence in there when they started in 1953 when Kiner was there, and they had to leave it in for the whole season. And when we had the National Convention in Pittsburgh in 1995, Frank Thomas was one of the speakers. I asked him what was his reaction when they took that out. He said he cried.
Yeah.
But in the 60s, they were basically they had a lot of hitting. Pitchers, Wall was hurt and basically had 4 seasons that were wasted. Friend, his arm tired after 4 years, and the only time they made a decent run in 1962 when they wound up going 10-0 and then lost to the Mets for the Mets' first ever win. And then in 1966, they were into the last weekend. They played a 3-game series with the Giants in Forbes Field, and I went out there for that. I met a friend of mine. We went. The Friday night game was rained out, and then they lost a doubleheader on Saturday, and that eliminated them. And the Giants the next day were eliminated by the Dodgers, where the Dodgers beat the Phillies, which turned out to be Sandy Koufax's last win in the major leagues.
Yeah, I remember that season.
But Clemente had won 4 batting titles. They always had hitters. And then, the farm system.
Mandy Alou.
Yeah, the farm system was very, very productive. And then in 1970, they won the division and lost to the Reds in 3 straight in the LCS. And the next year, they won everything. And,
let me ask you that. Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. You've seen both Forbes Field, and I think they knocked down Forbes Field after 1970 by the year, which was the year I was born. So you guys can make fun of me that I'm just a baby. But do you think that the building of Three Rivers Stadium and them playing there helped them actually in the 71 season?
Well, basically, Forbes Field was a pitcher's park and a doubles and triples park. It was not once they took the fence out, it was not a home run park. And I think that the team wasn't that speedy, so it's a very conjectural whether or not the artificial turf there helped them a lot, but they did. Everything came together. I mean, Stargell had a tremendous year. Clemente was still, even at the age of 37, was still a top-notch ball player. They had replaced Mazeroski with Dave Cash. They had Mason Gagan, and their ace was, by that time, was Steve Blass. And things just came together, and Murtaugh had come back to manage them in 1970. He replaced Larry Shepard, who was there in 1968 and 69. I think Murtaugh brought an attitude, like he did back in the previous teams he managed, that, hey, you guys can be who you are. I mean, they also had Doc Ellis, who at that time was, a bit eccentric, to say the least. And, just go out there and break your tails and know how to play the game right, and we'll do okay.
Let me ask both of you something.
Really, Yeah, I think Murtaugh was a really fine manager.
Yeah, I went to all 4 games of the World Series that year in Baltimore. And I was one of the few people, yeah. I was a few, it was only a 3.5 hour ride from here. And tickets were in Baltimore in those years were readily available for World Series games. And, I was one of the very few people there that went crazy after the Game 7 there.
Well, I ask you guys something. First, 1971.
Yeah, and of course, in 72, they had, I think was a better team than 71. And they wound up blowing the LCS to the Reds in the 9th inning of the 5th game. With just their so-called relief ace serving up the home run to Johnny Bench, putting 2 men on. They brought in Bob Moose, who got the 2 guys out, and then threw a wild pitch and sent in the winning run for the Reds. And then, after 72, Clemente, was tragically killed in the plane crash on New Year's Eve. And Blass, all of a sudden, couldn't pitch anymore. They totally lost all of his effectiveness. In fact, in 1973, they sent him down to AAA for a little while. He couldn't do anything there. He was 3-9 and had an ERA of 7. So in that year where the Mets won the division with 82 wins, the Pirates just couldn't make a go of it.
Well, everybody was in the race almost till the final day.
But there wasn't a race. It was a race of mediocrity.
No, it was a race of,
And they got back in 74, and they were pretty much in contention. They lost LCSs in 75, and they lost to the Phillies in 74 and 75. They lost close races to the Phillies in 77 and 78. In 79, everything clicked again. They had gotten Madlock and Tim Foley in mid-season trades, from the Giants and from the Mets. They got the Mets. They sent a shortstop named Frank Tavares, whose nickname to Pirate fans was E6.
Yeah.
And not only did he commit errors, but he committed errors at the most inopportune times. And they put together a patchwork staff of pitchers, because I think the leading winner in that team won 15 games. And, they managed to beat the Reds in the LCS, and then they, again, beat the Orioles like they did in 71, this time coming back from 3-1 down to beat them in the World Series. And then...
Yeah, and Stargell split the MVP.
MVP with Keith Hernandez.
Yeah.
Now, Willie lasted until 1982, and then he went into the Hall of Fame as a first ballot. Now, I loved Willie as a player, but I didn't think he was, good enough to merit a first ballot Hall of Fame, and the reason I think he got that was because there was nobody else eligible at the time.
And if you go back to that 79 season, a Pirate player was designated as most valuable player in every available category. All-Star Game, Dave Parker. NL Championship Series MVP was Stargell. World Series MVP was Stargell. And as we mentioned, the National League MVP.
No, Dave Parker in 1977 and 78 was the best player in the National League. And he could have had a Hall of Fame career if he didn't, unfortunately stuff it up his nose and get involved with the cocaine scandals. Because he was a tremendous, tremendous talent.
I think Dave is suffering from Parkinson's disease these days. In fact, Parker called me literally on the telephone last year sometime. He was taking care of his grandkid, but he was upset that he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. And, he's not even mentioned. And I mentioned the trials in the 1980s. You know what I mean? And, Vince Scully has tried for Parker. A lot of people have been pulling for Parker, especially when we now are bringing in steroids into the Hall of Fame.
Another one they had in 1971, and when they traded him to he wound up with Texas, and the Pirates wound up, I think, with Burt Blyleven in that trade after 1977. And there are people who think that Al Oliver is a Hall of Fame candidate. I'm not too sure about that, but he was also an very excellent ball player that they had during the early and mid 70s. And then the bottom fell out in the 80s for a while, and then all of a sudden in 1988 they started to make some noise with Barry Bonds and Bobby Bonilla, and that team wound up winning 3 straight division titles, losing into the LCS. The LCS is to Cincinnati in 1990, and to the Braves in 91 and 92. And I remember watching that game, Atlanta in 92, and a horror, the bottom of that ninth inning, because I knew that was the end of it, because Bonds and Drabek left as free agents after that season, and the team basically had no money, and they departed. They had traded Bonilla and John Smiley the year before, after the 91 season, and they basically, went into the 20 years of losing, which you probably describe better than I could.
Yeah.
Anytime they got a decent ball players, like the Phillies operated in the late 1930s, anytime they got a decent ball player during that era, especially the latter part of that era, they would get rid of them basically for nothing. Aramis Ramirez, Brian Giles, there's Freddie Sanchez. They had a long laundry list of guys who would have 1 year or 2 years, and then they basically give them away for nothing. And they made some terrible, terrible free agent signings, like the worst of which was Derek Bell, who was an outfielder who came as a free agent from the Mets. And this guy was such a tremendous head case that he didn't even make. I didn't think he stuck with the team for any length of time. But the bad decisions, and they were constantly changing owners, constantly changing general managers, constantly changing managers. And to put it frankly, they were very, very hard to follow. And they had a 20-year streak, which was the losingest stretch by any major professional team in history. They didn't have a winning season between 1993 and 2012. The only thing in baseball that really compares to this was the Phillies, who had one winning season in 1932 when they went 78 and 76. That was the only winning season they had between 1918 and 1949.
Yeah,
but that yeah.
You hit the nail on the head when you talked about the Pirates never really having pitching, because I'm just thinking about it and looking at some stuff here. There only, to my knowledge, there are only 3 pitchers who spent their careers and with the Pirates, but bulk of which came after expansion and won 100 games as many as 100 games in a Pirate uniform. That's, I don't think any other team can make a negative claim like that.
Now, also when they won in 71, the leading winner was Luke Walker, who won 15.
Yeah.
I think Jim Rooker, somebody may have been the leading winner in 1979 with 15. So, as I said earlier, Wilbur Cooper, who hasn't pitched Wilbur Cooper hasn't pitched for them in 93 seasons, is still the all-time leading winner.
Yeah. Well, Sven is the only guy since Cooper that's even come close to 200.
Well, he's in 97, 197 and 230.
Yeah.
And anyway, in 2013 they had their first winning season. In 2015, somehow they managed to win 98 games. In 2014 and 2015, they qualified for the wild card game. And the first time they lost was shut out by Madison Bumgarner, and in 2015 they were shut out by Jake Arrieta. I know the only chances they had to win either of those games was if they carry a 0-0 tie late into the game, and those two pitchers were removed because they reached pitch limits. But once the Cubs scored for Arrieta, the Giants scored for Bumgarner, I knew those games were over.
Yeah.
And last year they fell off to 78 wins. And, who knows? A lot of people in Pittsburgh think the ownership is extremely tight-fisted. But we'll see. But, they've had all in all, they've had a very interesting history. A lot of ups and downs. And, at times it's been very, very hard to root for them, but the big moments have been very much appreciated by me and their fans because there haven't been that many.
Did you ever get a chance to see Kiner playing in a Pittsburgh uniform?
No.
Yeah.
When Kiner retired in 1955, I was 12.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get to the Polo Grounds. I couldn't go to games by myself. My parents really had no interest. They took me a couple of games when I was younger, but they really had no interest in it.
Yeah.
I got into it through the Cards. Yeah.
Yeah. And he finished up in Cleveland. He was still very young when he.
He was 32. He had. I just read a biography of him that came out last year, and he had very, very severe back problems, and they were pretty severe when he was finishing up his tenure with the Pirates.
Yeah.
So he went to the Cubs, and when he went to Cleveland that one year, it was much too painful for him to continue. And of course,
if they had the DH, then he may have lasted a couple more years. But he could not play the field.
No,
he really did. He did
and
not.
he obviously everybody knows he came here and announced the Met games forever, and despite all the malaprops, he became a very beloved figure here.
Yeah.
And they would bring him in to do an occasional game the last couple of years of his life. And you listen to the man, and he made sense, even at 92, 93 years old.
No, I was living in New York in the 60s and 70s, and I thought I liked him.
Did you have any opinion of Kiner as a broadcaster?
Oh, I thought he was good. Yeah.
Because I'm on your broadcasting side also.
Yeah, I grew up in New York. I lived there the first 23 years of my life. I'm a huge Yankees fan. But I always watched Cadden's Corner. I thought he was just fantastic. Him, Bob Murphy, and what was his name? The one, Lindsey Nelson.
Lindsey Nelson, yeah.
They were just three great announcers that can rival, a Frank Messer or a Phil Rizzuto and a Bill White. And the Yorkers, they had the best of both worlds, even when the Mets were bad.
No, my fondest regard of Kiner as an announcer. They played in September 1974. They played a 25-inning game with the Cardinals. They wound up losing at about 3:15 in the morning. And during the later innings, Kiner had gone down in the ninth inning to the area where he did the Kiner's Corner show, and they would show him sleeping. I don't blame him.
I'm surprised, and you're probably the only one who was still watching.
No, I wasn't watching. I gave up. I was at that game. I left after the 8th inning because I had to go to work the next day, and I got home and I gave up after the 17th inning. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't walk in like a zombie the next day.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've enjoyed this session very much.
Yeah.
Ian, thank you for participating. Your contributions are more than welcome.
I appreciate it, and I'm very honored.
Okay, and you're more than welcome to join us as we continue this.
I appreciate it. I'm honored to be with both of you. Both of you have a lot more years than I do in baseball, and it's just a joy to talk. I just hope I wasn't too rude.
Well, David and I have been good friends.
No, it's been great having you, Ian.
David and I have been great friends for 25 years now, and I'm just very, very thankful that I was able to meet him, and we developed the friendship we've had over all these years.
Mutual. One of the finest.
Okay, till next week. I'm going to sign off now. Till next week, everybody. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you both.
Hey, thanks a lot, folks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Take
bye-bye.
care.